chances are you don't need to be reminded just how remarkable a human being Richie Benaud was. He was a complete all-rounder. He spanned hemispheres and old and new worlds. He was a professional athlete, a journalist, a broadcaster. He could bat, he could bowl, he dressed like a cocktail waiter for most of his life. In him, Australia created an incredible all-rounder inside and outside of cricket. And since then, on the cricket side, they haven't really created anything like that.
This show is called Last Knock. I don't really understand why it is called that.
Since he retired, there's been 27 cricketers with a batting average over 20 and a bowling average under 35. There's 3 Australians on that list, the Mitchells, Stark and Johnson, and Brett Lee. All of them average less with the bat than Richie Benaud did. When it comes to hundreds, all 3 of them combined have 100. Richie has 300s. But just in general, Richie would bat as high as number 6, where those guys, they were number 8s and sometimes even lower. They were bowlers who could bat a bit. Richie Benaud was much more of a genuine all-rounder. It's certainly an incredible list of cricketers. Callis and Pollock and Sobers and Imran Khan and Botham and Stokes and Shakib Al Hassan. Incredible all-round talent. And yet, no all-round talent from Australia since Richie. As good as Richie was, he's not exactly Sobers or Callis or of that level. But Australia, of course, did have another all-rounder pretty much of the same era who was that good. Keith Miller retired in 1956. And Australia has been looking for someone that good pretty much every day since. And if you want to know what a country who is thirsty for a great all-rounder looks like, let me show you. This is the world that Green has entered, one of unrealistic expectations and unfulfilled dreams, a sacred burial ground that is filled with batsmen who stopped rolling their arms over, bowlers who made one score and we all believed, and endless hope following by just crushing reality. Look at the headline. For 70 years we have waited. Cameron Green, please be the one. And there's a reason Australia is so obsessed with 70 years ago. Miller was one of those people who was annoyingly good at pretty much everything. He was a really good jockey, a champion Aussie rules footballer. He fought the Nazis while flying a plane. And he took the new ball and he batted at numbers 3, 4 and 5 at Test cricket. Miller was basically playing under 14 cricket, but at the Test level. Sobers was a better bat, but he wasn't as fast as Miller, and Callis was a greater player, but Miller was far more famous beyond cricket, and Imran Khan became Prime Minister, but Miller probably bagged more royals along the way. He was pretty much the ideal choose-your-own-adventure cricketer. And I say that because I did actually once write a comic book, or at least attempted to write a comic book about Keith Miller, where he would play cricket by day, and then by night, he would continue to fight secret Nazis. But if you don't like the idea of my comic that never got made, how about this? He has the 4th best average differential of all time. Imagine trying to follow that up. That's basically what I'm saying. And guess what? No one has. That was it. Australia's all-round game peaked in 1956. And Cameron Green, he's just another fresh body to throw on the pile to go up against a guy who beat the English and the Germans. The weird thing is that before Miller, Australia actually had a really good stream of pretty decent to great all-rounders. George Giffen's batting looks like a low average now, but it was high for the time, and generally he bowled himself a lot when he was captain. 33 overs per innings, in fact, which is a lot for anyone. He certainly believed he was an all-rounder. Monty Noble took 7 for 17 in a Test, and another match he made 133 from 285 runs. I mean, he could certainly play, and he was a really respected captain, even if his nickname was Marianne. Warwick Armstrong was a top-class batsman and a decent bowler, but he's really well known for being the guy who taught Australians how to be utter bastards on the field. Charles Calloway had an 18-year Test career but managed only 26 Tests in that time. He suffered from ill health, the First World War, and frequent arguments with selectors. Jack Gregory bowled very, very fast, and he made 224 Tests. So, I mean, clearly, he was a talent. And if you tack Keith Miller onto the end of that, that's an incredible sort of conveyor belt of all-rounders. I don't know if we have a collective now for all-rounders, although my wife did suggest Spork. But Australia certainly had a great collection of these all-rounders right up until this period. But even after Miller, there was this golden period of Australian all-rounders. Let me tell you about it a little bit. 1960, Tide Test. Guess what it was famous for? Yes, because it was the Tide Test. And there's a really interesting story when you look at this Tide Test. Australia needed 233 in the last innings to win the game. They fell to 92 for 6. Now usually that would be it, wouldn't it? 4th innings, you're all out. But this wasn't a normal team, and certainly not a normal team for Australia. If you look at the lineup, you get a good idea of what was going on. Bob Simpson was a fine opening batsman. He made a triple century, was part of the team with Laurie. He was a quality player, but he also bowled leg spin, and he took 71 wickets at 42. Now, he wasn't what you'd probably call an all-rounder, but he was certainly a handy fifth option. But he didn't need to be a fifth option in his team, because at number 6 was Ken Slasher Mackay, a stoic batting presence. The Slasher was very much tongue-in-cheek or ironic, and he was a gritty right-arm seamer and a gritty batsman, and he averaged roughly 34 with bat and ball. He was kind of a dependable, do everything, but not be great at anything all-rounder. A couple of spots down was Alan Davidson, who had a bowling average of 20 and a batting average of 25. He was a left-arm swing bowler when that wasn't really a thing, and he also smashed the ball everywhere. One spot behind him in the batting order was Richie Benaud. That is a deep batting lineup. They scored 134, but it turns out having all these all-rounders in the side was quite handy, as all 4 took wickets, and they also all put in valuable contributions in what was a low-scoring match with the bat. And this wasn't a one-off to tie a test, although it would have been great if they'd known that going in, and that's why they'd done it. These 4 guys actually played in 17 tests together. This was a thing of Australian cricket over a 7-year period, having all these different all-round options and strategic lineups, whatever they wanted. They were like South Africa of the 90s or England of the nows. And then in 1963, Davidson and Mackay played their last test, and Richie finished up the following year. And then, nothing for a generation. I mean, bupkis. It just kind of stopped. They flirted with all-rounders afterwards, mostly through batsmen who could bowl a bit, and Steve Waugh's bum probably ended his chance of being one. After 24 tests, he had 40 wickets, and then his upper hamstrings or his lower back started to cause problems. I mean, that's his bum, isn't it? But I don't know. Over the next 144 tests, anyway, he only took 52 more wickets. But that wasn't the only batsman that happened to. Michael Clarke took 6 for 9 early on in his career. Yes, 6 for 9. And in another test, he won at Sydney. Then his back went and he didn't bowl. Alan Border took a 10-wicket haul against the West Indies, but that was over a quarter of his career wickets. Mark Ward was a bit of an all-rounder when he came in. He bowled medium pace and spin, and Andrew Simons did a similar thing, but neither of them took a lot of wickets. Simon Kadich was a very good left-arm wrist spinner until he kind of stopped wanting to bowl. Steve Smith was a leg spinner. Not sure what happened to him after that. Michael Bevan actually played more tests because of his bowling. And now it's Marnus Labuschagne's turn to slowly give up bowling because he doesn't want to do it anymore or his body seizes up on him. And you can see from this list, there isn't really that many other bowlers there. Greg Matthews is probably one of the most all-rounders. But in Test cricket, he just didn't take many wickets. He had a bowling average of 48, but he batted incredibly well. In first-class cricket, he was a very good spinner. Dougie Walters was known as Golden Arm, but he didn't claim a wicket every test. Bob Cowper might have actually gone on to be a great all-rounder if he stuck around a little bit longer, but he wanted to get paid for a living, and that wasn't really what was happening in Australian cricket at that time. And that's pretty much the list. Batsmen who bowled until they didn't want to or their bodies wouldn't let them. And if I showed you the other list, it would just be bowlers who bat a bit in the tail and aren't terrible, but are like good number 8s. It would be disingenuous to say that after Slasher, Davidson and Benaud, there were no other all-rounders. In fact, after Miller, there have been 2 great all-rounders. The problem is that Australia hasn't quite looked at it that way. The first is Elise Perry, who, a bit like Miller, is a multi-sport athlete and an incredible footballer who kicked the goal of a World Cup. She was at one stage the best seamer in the world, not far away from being the best batter. She was probably the fastest bowler for a while as well. I mean, that is absolutely obscene. And none of that mentions what she did in a World Cup final for Australia in 2013. Perry probably shouldn't have played in that World Cup final, and yet she went out and batted, and she made 25 off 22, slogging them around. And the rest of the Australians weren't really hitting the ball that hard. When she came on to bowl, the West Indies were doing okay in their chase, and instead of steaming in and firing through the openers, she could barely get through the crease. For her first attempt, she had to pull up, she was limping, she looked worried. At that stage, it looked like she might not be able to bowl a single ball. But she refused to give up. Her third attempt was so painful to watch. It was watching someone really, really hurt, someone who didn't trust her body. Her teammates were screaming for her, and her teammates were screaming for her. Even through all this limping and not looking like she could bowl a ball, she managed to get Knight out in her first over. In her second over, she got out Taylor, and in her third over, she got out McLean. After 3 overs, Perry had 3 overs, 2 maidens, 2 for 3. And this is the thing, this is the easy time she could have just walked off the field. She kind of done her job. She destroyed the top order of the West Indies. But she just kept bowling. She bowled her entire 10 overs, often limping between every ball or even between overs. But she kept going until Australia was absolutely not going to lose that World Cup final. And in her last over, she bowled a bouncer. Australia did win that World Cup final. And 10 days later, they took an x-ray of that leg that was making her limp. And she had a fracture in her distal left tibia. That could be made up words for all I know. But I googled it and it seems to mean she did it with a stress fracture to her leg. She did it with a broken leg. She bowled Australia to victory with a broken leg. And it's not just Elise Perry. Australia had another incredible all-rounder, Adam Gilchrist. For some reason we don't believe that wicketkeepers are all-rounders and we don't count them the same way. If Callis, Imran and Sobers are at the top 3 of the all-rounder Hall of Fame, if that is a thing, then Gilchrist is a legitimate claim to be right up there with them. His keeping was at least the equal of Callis's bowling or Imran's batting, and his batting, well, I mean, there are a few players who are as good or better than him with the gloves, and there was even a batsman who could score as many runs as him. But no one could put that together with the second fastest strike rate in modern cricket. He was more destructive with the bat than most bowling all-rounders have ever been. He basically would walk out to the wicket and just mess people up. But apparently wicketkeepers can't really be all-rounders, so he did all that for nothing. And what Australia wants is quite simple. They want an all-rounder as good as Gilchrist. They just want him to be good at the batting and the bowling, not so much the wicket-keeping. So because Gilly didn't count, they kept looking. And for a little while, I think a lot of us felt like we had found someone. Shane Watson was basically every South African all-rounder kind of moulded into one. He had the blonde hair, the big shoulders. He bowled genuinely fast. He had a good technique. He was a little bit robotic and he hit the ball hard. That was the one. That's the missing link. That's what we'd been waiting for. If anything, we were worried he was too good to be true. The pain of thinking that now. Shane Watson did actually have a batting average over 20 and a bowling average under 35. He is a proper test match all-rounder. The problem is that he became a bit of a joke at the beginning of his career and then a bit of a joke at the end of his career, and many of us can't let go of the fact he was supposed to be an all-timer. But that's our issue, not his. But there is a reason he didn't appear on that list of 27 cricketers that I showed you earlier on. And that's because he didn't take over 100 test wickets. And for a little while, it looked like he would do that easily. But all those injuries that made him a bit of a laughingstock at the start of his career came back on his body, and also he didn't really seem to want to bowl that much. And eventually, even when he wanted to bowl, he just couldn't bowl the way that he did earlier in his career. Watson went from a 90-mile-an-hour bowler to essentially a second-change county bowler. Now, if he had started as Steve Waugh, no one would have cared, but he started like Ben Stokes, and by the end he was waddling in and wobbling them around. When I mention Watto though, you're probably not thinking about bowling, are you? You're probably thinking about batting. And it's worth going all the way back to the start of his career when he made a double 100 in first class cricket. Now back in those days, every Australian batsman in Shield cricket scored a double 100. I think you were given them as you actually got your cap. But most of those guys couldn't bowl. And with all due respect to Martin Love, he was expected to make double hundreds. Guys who could bowl 90 miles an hour were not. We were thinking this was a god. And that isn't what we got. For the first 4 years of his career, he was famous for being injured a lot, being afraid of ghosts, and not making a lot of runs. Finally, as a makeshift opener in 2009, he started to make some runs. But here's the thing that could only happen to Watto. Apparently, it wasn't enough. Part of the problem was clearly his. He only made 200s, but a lot of it had absolutely nothing to do with him. He happened to come into an era where just before that, Australia had made a lot of runs. They were expecting a lot of runs. He made just above average runs, and that seemed to disappoint everyone. The other problem was, just after him, Warner and Rogers opened the batting, and they ended up being the 4th most prosperous opening partnership that Australia has ever had. Now, of course, if you look at averages, you might be able to find other people who average more than them, like, say, Watson and Cattage. But no one was really looking at it that way. Shane Watson got good just as the ICC brought in DRS, his nemesis. I think it's worth mentioning that Watson had a very decent technique. If someone bats like that where I'm from, we call it Terry Test Match. High elbow, a little bit robotic, but everything's basically in the right area with a big stride forward. That giant forward press that he had probably helped him pretty much all the way until 2009, when umpires started realising that the forward press doesn't mean that you don't go out LBW anymore. It wasn't that Watson was going out to DRS, it was that all the technology that umpires were using for DRS was retraining them, and they suddenly realised that they just didn't care about Watson's big forward press anymore. They were going to give him out if it was going to hit the stumps. If you look at Watson's overall record, compared to normal batsmen, he went out LBW a lot more. What is really weird about this, and very unfortunate for Watson, is at the exact same time that there were less LBs happening to seam bowlers, Watson started getting more LBs to seam bowlers. He went in the wrong direction. He ended up with double the amount of LBWs to right arm seamers than the average batsman would. I don't think in and of itself that was that bad. It just happened to be that he DRS'd almost every one of those LBWs. It was as if the ICC made it mandatory for him to take a review. If you watch cricket in this period, a right arm seamer would come on, They would bowl a ball. It would hit Watson in the pad. The umpire would give him out. Watson would review it. It would be clipping the outside of leg stump seemingly every time. And he would walk very sadly, very slowly from the field. And that's how Watson finished his career. Not making 100 or, taking a fifer or anything like that. It was literally sulking as he walked off the field for the last time, having got one more DRS wrong. So with Watson, there was this whole lot of baggage. If you had invested any energy in Shane Watson being awesome, then of course you felt disappointed with his record. But if he had just appeared from a bubble and you hadn't thought about him at all and you hadn't thought he was ever going to be another Keith Miller, his record was fine. He did very well. He battled his own body. He batted out of position. He probably never batted in the position he should have. And he ended up with a very respectable all-round record. The problem was Shane Watson was supposed to be Keith Miller. And he was Slasher Mackay. And you cannot discount Australian arrogance and exceptionalism in all of this. Because Australia's had the best openers and the best top order and the best middle order and the best spinners and the best wicket keepers and the best captains, and they've won a lot of tests. They've won the most tests and they've had one of the best eras of all time, and they've won a bunch of World Cups. They are used to being absolutely great. They demand excellence in all places of cricket. And then in all-rounders, we just haven't had that. We haven't really come close to it in, let me check, 70 years. England spent an entire generation looking for the next Dean Both, and Australia was looking for the next Glenn McGrath while they still had a Glenn McGrath. Now, Keith Miller, they were looking for Keith Miller for about, let's say the first 50 years, but now Australian fans aren't even looking for the next Keith Miller. That's kind of gone. Young Australian fans are now just born with this inherited sadness, this hole in their heart where an all-rounder should go. They don't even know that much about Keith Miller anymore. He's not even part of the conversation. He's so long ago. They just know that they want an all-rounder. And Australia has tried, like everyone, almost anyone who's ever good in like under 12 cricket, who opened the batting and opened the bowling on AstroTurf, seems to have had a go. I mean, this isn't even the first Cameron. They tried Cameron White. They tried Marcus North. They tried Moses Enriquez, Hilton Cartwright, Max Walker. It just goes, Simon O'Donnell. It just goes, Tom Moody. I could go, it just goes on and on. They've tried almost everyone in Australia, and we just want one. We just want one incredibly great, all-time legend, Hall of Fame all-rounder. Is that too much to ask for? Sure, we've had everything else. It would be great for everything else. And then who steps in? Cameron Green, this giant man child, with big shoulders, who can bowl 90 miles an hour, and he has these ginormous feet, and of course he needs ginormous feet. Look at the footprints he's walking in. Keith Miller, he has to stand up to Keith Miller. And Cameron, this is unrealistic expectations for you. We know that. We know that you probably won't live up to this. We know no matter how good you are, we will probably never see you as Keith Miller. We'll never see you as that great all-rounder. But we have to hope, Cameron. We have to hope. Because 70 years, we've been waiting 70 years for you. And if we haven't been waiting 70 years for you, we've been waiting 75 years for whoever's next. And 80 years for whoever's after that. We will continue to wait. We will continue to plead. Will someone please give us one of the greatest all-rounders of all time? We don't deserve it, but we want it.